Today we're digging into a really fascinating and honestly pretty overlooked chapter in the life of a revolutionary leader. Before he was known to the world as Ho Chi Minh, he was Nguyen Quoc, and he found himself on trial not by his enemies, but by his own allies, right in the heart of Soviet Moscow.
I mean, think about that for a second. This question is really what our story is all about today. It's a story about a test of loyalty and pure survival, under the kind of intense pressure you can barely imagine, all playing out in the paranoid, high-stakes world of the Soviet Union.
So this all goes down between 1934 and 1938. As you can see here, these were years spent in a kind of political limbo in the Soviet Union. It was a true trial by fire that tested his resolve in ways that, let's be honest, most history books just never get into.
All right, so picture this. After being freed from a British prison in Hong Kong, thanks to a really dedicated lawyer, by the way, Nguyen Quoc manages to make his way back to Moscow, the epicenter of the international communist movement. But this wasn't some kind of hero's welcome. Not at all. He arrived completely worn out, physically depleted after years in prison, and totally cut off from his organization. He was itching to get back to work, but the Communist International, the Comintern, basically told him, nope. First, they shipped him off to a sanatorium on the Black Sea to recover, and then they enrolled him in the prestigious Lenin School to study. So just as he's starting to get his bearings, this shadow of doubt starts to creep in. And here's the kicker. It wasn't coming from his enemies. It was coming from his own comrades in the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. And that, right there, was a threat way more dangerous than any colonial prison. In April of 1935, a letter lands at the Comintern. It's from his own party's leadership, but it's not a progress report. It's not a letter of support. No, it was an attack. A letter packed with incredibly dangerous accusations against their most prominent figure.
You have to understand, the weight of these charges was just staggering. He wasn't just being criticized for his strategy, he was being directly blamed for the arrest of over 100 party members. The letter painted him as careless at best, or at worst, a traitor.
And these weren't vague complaints. They were specific, and they were designed to be damaging. They questioned his judgment, sure, like using a known traitor or mishandling sensitive info, but they also went for the jugular, questioning his fundamental loyalty and even his ideological purity. They even demanded he write a formal self-criticism, which was basically a forced confession of his so-called errors. Okay, so in the tense political climate of 1930s Moscow, you just couldn't ignore charges like these. They were way too serious. The Comintern had no choice but to launch a formal investigation into the man they knew by his alias, Lin.
The investigation really boiled down to 3 critical questions. You can think of each one as a potential landmine that could have completely ended his revolutionary career. And believe me, the investigators dug into every single detail.
And here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. As the investigation moved forward, the accusations just started to crumble. It was confirmed he had no idea about the traitor. And then, get this. In a beautiful twist of irony, the investigation revealed that the Comintern itself, the very organization investigating him, had actually funded his legal defense and escape from Hong Kong. So, the final verdict? Well, it was a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, he was cleared of the most damaging charge, disloyalty. Huge. But he was still criticized for making serious mistakes. The board found 0 evidence of betrayal and ordered his file to be destroyed. So his name was cleared, but his ordeal? That was far from over. So you'd think, great, he's vindicated, back to work, right? Wrong. Despite being officially cleared, Nguyen Quoc entered a new, and you could argue, even more frustrating phase. It was a period of forced inactivity, where he was trusted, but not actually utilized. And you can really see his diminished status in moments like this. At the huge 7th Comintern Congress in 1935, while this investigation was still hanging over his head, he wasn't a full delegate for his party. He was given card number 154, making him an advisor with consultative status. His main job? Translation work. So instead of leading a revolution, he was stuck learning. He poured all that immense energy into his studies at a research institute, and he absolutely excelled, earning top marks. But all the while, he was patiently but persistently writing letters, making requests, trying to get back into the active struggle. And time again, he was denied. Then, on the 7th anniversary of his arrest in Hong Kong, he wrote this incredibly powerful and personal plea. I mean, you can just feel the distress his inactivity was causing him. He wasn't asking for safety or comfort.
He wanted to be useful to the cause he had given his entire life to.
And then, finally, after years of writing letters and just waiting in the wings, his perseverance paid off. In late 1938, the decision finally came down. The Comintern was going to let him return to Asia.
That train ride marked the end of his 5-year trial in Moscow. It was this quiet beginning of a very long journey, one that would eventually lead him back to the borders of Vietnam, where he would finally take on the name Ho Chi Minh and lead his country's revolution.
So why does any of this matter? What's the big takeaway here? Well, this period wasn't some kind of setback. It was a masterclass in what you might call strategic patience. And here's maybe the most important part. Throughout this whole time, he absolutely refused to write the forced self-criticisms his comrades demanded. He just silently endured the suspicion, because he knew that admitting fault on paper would be a permanent surrender, a tool his rivals could use against him forever.
This whole ordeal could have absolutely destroyed his career, but instead, it forged the resilience of a leader who understood that sometimes the most important battle is the one you fight in silence. It's a powerful lesson in patience, in preparation, and in trusting that history, in the end, will always be the final judge.